In this lesson, we're going to look at one reason which helped Hitler to gain power in Germany. We're going to look at Hitler's aims and how his actions which he undertook to realise those aims affected Versailles and the League of Nations. So, we've looked a little bit at this factor already. It's the Great Depression and Hitler. Hitler and the Nazi parties used the problems of the Depression by promising simplistic solutions to the problems of the Depression. Here on the right you can see a Nazi propaganda poster. Arbeit, Freiheit und Brot. Work, freedom and bread. So the Nazis had very simplistic explanations of the problems of the Great Depression. They blamed certain groups and they gave themselves as the solution. At the time, democracy didn't seem to be working. The democratic governments were chaotic and disorganized, and many in Germany were moving both towards the right, towards the Nazi party, and towards the left, towards the communists. In fact, its fear of the communists is one factor which helps Hitler to become Chancellor or head of the German government in January of 1933. And by March of 1933, the enabling law was passed. The enabling law basically made Hitler a dictator. Democracy had died in Germany. Hitler was dictator. In a speech then, in the Kroll Opera House, Hitler gives out his simplistic explanation of the problems of Germany, who to blame, and what the Nazis are going to do about it. So, here are Hitler's words. More than 14 years have passed since the unhappy day when the German people, blinded by the promises of enemies at home and abroad, lost everything. So what happened 14 years ago? That Hitler is blaming the Treaty of Versailles. And who is he blaming for the Treaty of Versailles? He's blaming enemies at home. Hitler agrees with a right-wing, racist and simplistic explanation of why the German army was defeated, that it was stabbed in the back by Jews and communists and by the November criminals who signed the armistice. He's also blaming the treaty makers of Versailles, so that foreign enemies also he blames for Germany's problems. Since that day of treachery, again referring back to elements inside Germany that he blames, specifically communists and Jews, God has withheld his blessing from our people. Arguments and hatred spread among us. Hitler here is obviously offering himself as the strong leader, the Führer, the strong leader that is part of the fascist Nazi ideology. He's promising that within 4 years, unemployment will be finally overcome. You'll see later on when you do your depth study on Nazi Germany how much, to what extent the Nazis are able to fulfill that promise. So, here we have a historian, Anthony Adamthwaite, an extract from his book, The Making of the Second World War. And Anthony Adamthwaite does identify, it's his interpretation, the Depression as a major factor in Hitler gaining power. Without the Depression, Hitler would not have come to power. Mass unemployment reinforced all the resentments against Versailles and the Weimar democracy since 1919. Overnight, the National Socialists were transformed into a major political party. 12 deputies in 1928 to 107 in 1930. So he's saying that there were resentments against the Treaty of Versailles beforehand, and some people were unhappy about the Weimar democracy, but the extra factor on top of the unemployment pushed a lot of people towards the Nazi Party. The example, 12 deputies in 28 before the Wall Street crash, 107 in 30 after the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression. So he does identify the Great Depression as one factor. There are other factors in Hitler gaining power in Germany. So what were Hitler's aims once he had achieved power? Hitler wanted the reversal of the hated Treaty of Versailles. For example, to remilitarize the Rhineland. Remember, Germany was forbidden to station troops in the Rhineland, even though it was an area of Germany. It bordered France. Anschluss with Austria was something else that was forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles and that Hitler wanted to achieve. So he wanted the reversal of the Versailles Treaty. He hated communism and wanted to destroy the USSR, the Soviet Union, and those who believed in communism. in its place, he wanted to establish a large empire in Eastern Europe and populate that with pure Germans, which in his word he called Aryans. This was a misguided and unscientific belief that the Germans were a master race called Aryans, and that what he called Untermenschen or subhumans were people of Jewish or Eastern European descent, and they should be either made into slaves and work for the Aryans or should be killed. He wanted to build up the German armed forces. He took great pride in the armed forces, and he saw them as being able to achieve his goals also. So what did Hitler practically do towards his goals? In October of 1933, Germany left the League of Nations. In the same time, it withdrew from the disarmament conference, which was taking place in Geneva in Switzerland. After withdrawing from the disarmament conference in 1933, he begins a secret program of rearmament. Remember, Germany is forbidden a number of things by the Treaty of Versailles, and Hitler basically breaks all of those. He breaks all of the military restrictions on Germany from the Treaty of Versailles. He instructs this man, General von Fritsch, create an army of the greatest possible strength. And that's what happens next. In July of 1933, production of tanks begins within Germany. In 1934, aircraft and warships begin production. In 1935, Hitler begins to build up the size of his army by introducing conscription. And it's in 1935 that Hitler stops a secret rearmament program and holds these big public military rallies. He's not hiding his rearmament anymore. Here's a statistical example of just how much military production rose in Germany in the early to mid-1930s. The year before Hitler took power, 1932, 36 aircraft. The year after Hitler gained power, in 1934, nearly 2,000 military aircraft produced, and in the following year, more than 5,000. This is at a time when the Western democracies, Britain, France, the United States, they're not focused on military spending, they're focused on the Depression. In 1935, something happened which was very advantageous to the Nazi Party. It was the Saar Plebiscite. If you remember, the Saarland was removed from Germany in the Treaty of Versailles, the Saar area. And there was to be a plebiscite, or a national vote, in 1935, where the people of the Saarland would vote to join either France, Germany, or to remain independent and run by the League of Nations. Well, Hitler sent this man on his left, Joseph Goebbels, who was the Nazi Minister of Propaganda. And Goebbels created a very effective propaganda campaign playing on fears of communism. It's also a very modern propaganda campaign as well. What was helping Goebbels and Hitler and the Nazi Party was that the majority of the people in the Saar were ethnic Germans, and 90% of the Saarland did vote to return to Germany. So Hitler gained a piece of Germany that had been lost, and he also gained the valuable coal reserves of the Saarland also. So let's do a quick summary then. So the Depression certainly was a factor in helping Hitler gain power. He subsequently left the League in the same year as gaining power in 1933. His aims were to reverse the Treaty of Versailles, to regain lost German territory, to destroy the USSR and communism, to build an empire in Eastern Europe and populate it with what he called Aryans, and to rebuild the German army. Again, that was through a program of rearmament, tanks, aircraft, and conscription in 1935. This effectively ends all of the limits on German power in the Treaty of Versailles itself. He also gains the Saarland in 1935 after 90% of the inhabitants of the Saarland vote to rejoin Germany. So there you go, a brief summary of Hitler gaining power, his aims in power, and some of his early politics.